Okay, so I am here today with Helen Ball and Cecília Tomori, and Helen is in the UK, Cecilia is in the US, and these are two amazing people who have an incredible experience related to infant sleep. And what I wanted to have a talk with them today about was infant sleep and basically sleep products that are out there. And they might include things like baby boxes or sleep training, or these latest models of products that parents are being basically advised to purchase so their babies can sleep longer, and they're bassinets that seem to tie babies down and move so that they keep them asleep. So, but before we start on that, I'd just like to get a bit of an idea from both of you what you think about the way parents are being advertised to, and perhaps, you know, guided to have babies sleep, perhaps from a Western perspective, from how you'd look at it from an anthropological perspective. So let's start with Helen first, and then we'll go to Cecília.
All right, then. Well, as an evolutionary anthropologist, I suppose the way I come at it is what babies biologically expect to have happen to them after birth, and then what we do to them after birth, and kind of what is the mismatch between what babies are biologically expecting and what they're getting. And one of the issues with the products that are available for new parents to market is that many of them are designed to be parent substitutes, and they're trying to persuade parents that some other kind of device, some soft sleep pod or some rocking bassinet, or, you know, whatever it is, can take the place of their body. But what babies expect in the first few months of life is to have their parents right there and to be in physical contact with them. And, you know, nothing, in my view, can emulate the parent's body. So, you know, watching your baby, responding to your baby, you know, that's really all you need to do. You don't need to go out and buy very expensive things in order to look after a young baby.
And Cecília, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, building on that great foundation, you know, I think from the sort of more cultural, anthropological, political economy point of view, I mean, it's a historical issue that's only in particular settings and facilitated by the rise of capitalism and this sort of unbridled, completely unregulated exploitation of parents via marketing. And so I think that's sort of what our perspective would be from the sort of slightly complementary but slightly different angle from a different part of anthropology, is reinforcing what Helen said. None of this has anything to do with actual human infant needs. None of this has much to do actually with how most people around the world care for their babies either. But the idea that one needs these kinds of products, you know, invented in Western, white, Euro-American settings, has become dominant, as particularly, you know, in media narratives. It's such an overrepresentation of this particular group of people. And then again, you know, the entire political economic system historically privileges that kind of perspective. So then people elsewhere also want to emulate these kinds of perspectives. And so, you know, it's sort of this rampant exploitation of people for profit that's unfortunately not helping anyone other than, you know, the people who profit from it. So that would be my intro, I suppose.
I love the perspective from both, because this sort of all came about because I was contacted by some colleagues and very close friends you know, back in 2021 because they were so concerned of these contraptions that they were seeing. And I know the last, like I often look at these I call them contraptions because you sometimes see these babies that they're put into type of a sack, and then they don't have their hands readily available, and then they're actually strapped down into that crib where they keep them moving. And I sort of think, we've done lots of research on the potential dangers of swaddling, and I wonder if any of these products are actually based on research rather than just gimmicks. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think some of them have some maybe original foundations in research, but I think that research, that initial core of an idea has probably been elaborated on so far that it's quite a long way removed from what that original research was saying. So, the kind of ideas that babies respond to swaddling by quieting and calming and that kind of thing, there is some evidence to support that, and people are on the fence about whether swaddling kind of suppresses babies' instincts in some respects, but facilitates them in others. And it's there are a lot of cultures around the world that do swaddle their babies, and it's a very long established historical practice. So it's one of the more ambiguous aspects of infant care to try and unpick. But then people have layered other things on top of that, that swaddling makes babies sleep more deeply, and parents who swaddle their babies are able to get more sleep themselves. And then, you can have expensive devices that are hooked up to the internet that you can monitor your baby on your phone, so you don't actually even have to be in the same room as your baby, and you can just set the crib to vibrate a little bit more if your baby starts to cry. And it's all about kind of delegated parenting, but it's delegating the parenting to a machine rather than to a human being.
Yeah. And Cecilia, your thoughts?
I mean, I'm just going to be blunt about this. I mean, there's a long history of elites exploiting other people to do this kind of work, right? So, I mean, the foundations of some of this have to do with elite, again, the same people. It's usually European and American white elite people who either coerce people via, enslavement, indentured servitude, you name it, or just, economic exploitation of poor people to carry out tasks of infant care for them. So the idea of elites not taking care of their babies and sending other poor, impoverished, exploited people to do it for them has an extremely long and not particularly pleasant history. Yeah. So I think that's step one. I think the second step, which I've been thinking a lot about, working on different kinds of industry strategies, is actually the hijacking of science. So I think what's happening here, what Helen was referring to in terms of how science is being used, is a very common tactic. It's part of a playbook. It's an industry set of strategies that have been used for a very long time, very successfully, to do the same kind of thing. And to do that is you take various elements of science. One way of calling it is scienciness, the appearance of science, in order for people to buy your product. Yeah. And so I think that's the ultimate objective, is not scientific research for better understanding of how, human caregivers and infants interact or any of that. The ultimate objective is to enhance profits. Yeah. And I think that we need to keep that in mind whenever we see the latest and greatest, innovation, which is being marketed with the use of science. So I think that paying close attention to that can be very difficult, because it can be subtle, it can be very misleading and very manipulative. So I think that we really need to keep a close eye on those scientific claims. And I think even scientists themselves have to really be careful about how their research might be misused or appropriated by various people who actually are just interested in making profits.
Yeah. I think we see that in so much in infant care everywhere, not just under sleep. And I'm curious, like recently in Montreal, our mayoress is going to be offering to all infants that are born in Montreal these new baby boxes. I know there's been, had some interesting writings about this. And we had an election not too long ago. And one of my comments to the person who came to my home was, I'm aware of this. What are the products that are going to be in these baby boxes? And I said, if you actually decide to put any products in there that, that you shouldn't be putting products. If you want to give, baby clothes or things like that, that's fine. But if you put anything else, I'll never vote for you again. And there will be a riot in the front, on Montreal's doorsteps. And I think, they understood this, and she was quite, aware of this. But I'm also wondering, what are your thoughts about the baby boxes? I know there's been writings about this. It's been a hot topic we've had for a while. Whoever would like to go
first, Cecília?
I feel like you should start because you have started the conversation about baby boxes. I'll add.
Okay, so yes, we have experience of baby boxes in the UK, two different types really. In Scotland, they implemented the kind of welfare program baby box where you give new parents kind of a whole bunch of stuff to help them get started. So the idea, or at least the rhetoric, is around leveling the playing field and making all babies have this similar start in life and all of that kind of stuff. They did that on the back of the Finnish baby box program, which is not about really boxes at all. It's about the social welfare program in Finland, and this is just one component of the way in which the Finnish government supports families. It's not as well embedded into a social welfare program in Scotland as it is in Finland, and it's more about the stuff than it is about anything else. But the political agenda was to try to persuade voters that the party who proposed it, who were the Scottish government at the moment, care about the people. The other kind of baby box that we had in the UK were implemented in England in some NHS trusts in a partnership with a commercial company. And this was basically another example of a profit-making company attempting to exploit the NHS to get access to new parents to sell their products to. So I'm quite skeptical about the benefits of baby boxes because of the English experience, but even the Scottish experience, although parents like them because they're getting something for free, it's not been clearly demonstrated that this is actually a beneficial program for people who might benefit from some other way of dispersing resources in a welfare state. So it was very clearly offered when it was first presented as a political selling point rather than anything else.
Interesting.
Which sounds like exactly what your experience is there.
Yeah,
it's not unlike other similar marketing schemes. So I mean, multiple different agendas can come together again to make it appear as if this is really about, some sort of scientific benefit, but it may have nothing to do with that, or it may have something to do with that, partially something to do with that, and have multiple other agendas, and I think providing parents with material support is a great idea, preferably through policies that actually enable them to, spend time with their children and actually care for them in a way that they can meet the needs, the basic needs of their families, starting with things like, housing, food security, paid family leave. I think those would be, really, really great starts so that people can actually do the things that they need so that they can have that proximate contact with their infants that the infants actually need. That would be a great start. The reality of some of these programs is not the same. And, unfortunately, when people fill the boxes with essentially samples of products and coupons and whatever else, they're actually just another marketing device, very successfully implemented previously by things like formula packs in hospitals and other similar initiatives of sending people samples of whatever product it is. I mean, those are very tried and true marketing techniques.
Yeah.
So I think that these kinds of ventures are problematic because what they do is they actually build brand loyalty. And so they're essentially using a supposed welfare intervention to gain that loyalty virtually for minimal cost that can then generate profit for well beyond the box. I don't think that that's really the best way to support parents. I think it's also a cover for the state for the inadequacy of policies that actually support parents equitably.
Yeah. It's interesting because like Montreal and Quebec, we actually have, paid maternity leave. We've got a lot of good things in place. And I just, my concern has always been with these types of things is, and I think it's wonderful if they can give, I think they had things like some washable diapers, nappies, some sleepers, little blankets, there might have been some creams, and I was concerned about even putting in products like that because of the fact that a lot of these things are not actually, they're costly in the long term when it's extra product that's in there. So I will follow up with Damaris and the company to make sure the organization, just to make sure that they are keeping themselves on track. But my concern is also that the idea of these boxes that, okay, you put the baby in the box as well, for supposedly a safe sleep environment, but a lot of these boxes are not even, they're not geared in reality to be used like that either. So there is we do need to keep an eye on what actually goes on out there. Something else I was interested in discussing with you was the topic of sleep training. Which seems to
be several weeks.
We might have to do a specific topic on that. But I don't like this idea that every parent seems to believe that they've got to have their baby trained to sleep, and we seem to have this disconnect of, like you said at the beginning, of what is normal and what's expected. And is it possible that it's just related to, we're living in 2022 now, and the idea of what a parent, caring for a child is very different? Or is it that we're trying to do too much and that parents are just so overtired that they focus on, well, if I can get my baby to sleep, I'll be fine. So just wondering about your thoughts about sleep training, because it scares me, sleep training, what I see out there. It's costly, and it's also the disconnect, are those children, as they grow, are we losing are we disconnecting with them because we're actually not meeting their needs? Have fun. We'll let Helen go first.
I think you should go first, Helen.
Well, there's so much that you can say about sleep training. I mean, it's obviously another example of parents being manipulated for the glory of the dollar or the pound or whatever you want to call it. It's another way of making money off of parents' anxieties and concerns, and also their needs, because people are stretched very thin. And, there's a huge market for sleep training in places where maternity leave is not very lengthy, or, parental leave is insufficient, etc. But, there's also this kind of whole historical idea about the way babies ought to behave and the way in which society has to shape the behavior of babies, which is to not bother their parents, to, we had this whole era of scientific baby care in the 1920s and 30s when parents were led to believe that their job was to create, compliant, independent, self-reliant children, and that things like, picking your baby up when it cries, or responding to it too quickly, or attending to it in the night, all created these clingy, dependent children that were never going to be able to leave their mother's apron strings, and blah 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 blah. And there's just this historical cultural narrative in sort of Northern Europe and the US, or the places in the US where people came from Northern Europe, that is about creating independence. There was a paper written about this from Germany in the 90s called The Cult of Independence, which was all about, creating these kind of children via techniques such as sleep training. So there's a lot of kind of historical baggage still floating around from that era in our societies. And so because parents have heard all of this stuff from their own parents and grandparents, etc., they believe it. They think that it's all true. But, Cecilia will tell us that if you look cross-culturally at other societies, they all think we're mad, completely mad for the kinds of things that we do to our children, leaving them alone at night, putting them down, separating them, leaving them in the dark, to be frightened, etc. So, you don't really have to think very hard about what babies' needs are to be able to see that, all of this stuff has been created relatively recently by people who have got an agenda.
Yeah.
Helen sums it up so much that I'm like, okay, she's covered most of it. I mean, short story, versus the 8-hour version that we could sit through, right? Is, it's a cultural invention by the same people, by the same elites in the late 19th century. I've tracked it down with others. We have some wonderful quotes about, people, the founder of American pediatrics, my favorite, Emmett Holt, and I have become quite close over the years, when he talked about essentially letting babies cry because he invented a circular argument about how they don't actually need to be fed. So first he had to establish the fact that they don't need to be fed or have human contact, and then to justify that and say, well, then they clearly can't be crying for something that they don't actually need. I mean, it's a completely circular argument. In the late 19th century, obviously these circulating ideas are not just his, but in the cultural waters, in these same kind of elite circles who, again, are relying on other people already to take care of those babies. So it's not necessarily contact even with the mother. Sometimes we're talking about servants who would have actually slept next to that baby, and sometimes would have also nursed the baby. So as we move into the 20th century, and, we have a complete takeoff of the scientific parenting, modernity, ideas about sort of capitalism, industrial ways of modern scientific ways of doing everything, not just infant care, that's colliding with things like, servants are becoming expensive for the elites. Middle class people can't really afford those kind of servants. And so they end up, putting those babies into a separate room with no one. And then, during that time, you have the acceleration of, books about sleep problems that emerge out of nowhere. So I think sleep training, is a solution to a problem that was created by these kinds of ideas that were not aligned with anything to do with, how human infants behave, or what they need. And then, of course, fueled by profits.
Yeah.
So, here we are, fast forward to 2022. And I think, depending on the circumstances that people face, and even within more equitable societies, you still have inequities and marginalization. You have huge differences in how people are able to care for their babies, and these kinds of concepts and people behind them work to exploit those kinds of insecurities and the structural vulnerabilities. And so these ideas can take off, and remembering that elites have a lot of influence. I think that that's another sort of common theme. So when various, and that's why influencers now are sort of like the new reinvention of this, when you have, YouTubers who again are also benefiting financially from these platforms, and people who are so-called scientific experts who often are also profiting from various products, that they're marketing. Those kinds of elites influence how other people do things. And that's sort of a pattern that occurs throughout the entire historical period that we talked about. It's unfortunate, but I think I would say there's also some tides turning on this, to sort of end on a more hopeful note. I do think that even in a profoundly unequal and unsupportive society like in the United States, you're also seeing, renewed interest and commitment to things like proximity, including, breastfeeding, including carrying babies, and, sort of responding to the baby rather than just kind of putting the baby somewhere else. So I think people are actually often, putting in a lot of consideration and thought and effort in trying to meet their needs, because some professionals have been providing more accurate information and supporting parents in being able to do those kinds of things. So I think that as the scientific community has turned away from some of these earlier paradigms, I do think that that has made a difference. So I think that there is hopefulness in that. And I'm seeing that hopefully, that will be somewhere where we're going in the future.
Yeah, that's a really important point. I was reading recently a publication by both of you, along with Jim McKenna, that 2019 towards a integrated anthropology on infant sleep. And I think halfway through that article, you talk about the socio-cultural anthropology of infant sleep, and you talk about that intersection of capitalism, biomedicine, and colonialism. And I thought, like everything that we've sort of been talking about today, where we look at this negotiation of sleep arrangements, and that I think there's a quote here, the global power dynamics of biomedical models of infant sleep. Which basically, is representing a Western culture with separation in general being basically what this is all, it is dictating all the practices. And yeah, Cecília, I think we're coming back to a change where perhaps we've reached a generation that's starting to question and asking why, and and perhaps finances are less, they may not have as readily available finances, so they are asking those questions. Why do we need this? That connection with their child. So and I love the article. I'd love to perhaps do another chat talking about that specific article because it touches everything. So if we were just on closing, what would be some key messages you would like to give both professionals, but also to parents and grandparents and any friends around that are going to be chatting with young families on the topic of infant sleep and safety that's there?
I think my take home for new parents would be that all that their baby really needs is them. They don't need all of these gadgets and gizmos and products, whatever. And all they need is the support of the people around them. So for grandparents, it's to be there, to provide support, to help. And for health professionals, I think it depends where you are, because I think health professionals are under a lot of constraints, and different constraints in different countries at the moment. So it's much harder for health professionals in the United States, I think, to talk about some of these issues, particularly the sleeping issues, than it is, say, in the UK at the moment. So it's about having the courage really to open up those conversations rather than closing down conversations by just giving, by just repeating kind of simplistic messages that don't actually meet anybody's needs. So,
thanks.
All of the above. Seconded. I think my take homes usually are very similar. The emphasis on being close, so closeness over, you know, products, gadgets, and anything that may appear to be sort of profit generating things. Listening to people who do not have those kinds of stakes really helps, you know, which can be hard to tell, but I think, you know, helpful. Never hesitating to find more supportive professionals, because there's a diverse set of professionals out there and they're not all the same. Getting the right support matters. Obviously, advocating for better policies where science actually reflects, you know, normal human infant development, and looks at the evolutionary and cross-cultural context of these things. And, you know, I think the power of reclaiming things that have been broken for me is a big one. So I think for many of the communities that I work with and groups that are very much invested in health equity, questioning where ideas actually came from, who holds the power to make those kinds of ideas dominant, and reclaiming traditions that have sustained communities for centuries is a really, really powerful, important message, and can be extremely healing, especially in that very violent context that some of these ideas came to be, and how they took over in particular circumstances that I know you're familiar with in Canada. Residential schools being, of course, one of the primary examples, enslavement being another. So I think we have to talk about those contexts and provide the support for communities to thrive.
Thank you both so much. That has been an amazing discussion today. I think people are going to listen to this. They're going to really, you know, gain a lot of knowledge. And again, it's so important for us to be sharing, you know, with our colleagues, our friends, our families, you know, that reality is you have, you know, the mother, the parent, the baby together, and the family unit, and you don't need a lot of other things. So, you know, when we can support the very basic needs that are not necessarily wants, you know, we can do so much to help families grow into being really strong advocates for themselves as well as those around them. So I really want to thank you both for spending the time with me today. And, you know, I'm going to wish you all this to be safe and stay healthy in this very troubled times that we are through right now. So thank you so much.